Let me introduce our guest by saying that we live in a town and we live in a time when it's easy to be cynical about politics and about government because our city is in crisis. But cynicism is ultimately corrupting. You have to rise above it. Our guest today graduated from the University of California, San Diego. He obtained a master's and PhD degree from the University of Notre Dame. He decided to run for the Congress of the United States against a heavily entrenched Republican, and he won. And 6 times he was elected to the United States House of Representatives, and then decided he would do something different with his life. He was appointed to the 9/11 Commission, and he served that commission, as did all of its members, with the greatest of distinction. He's a husband, a father of 3, a person of transcendent values. But his greatest commitment is to public service. And as you listen to him today, and as you think about his quest to become the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, remember, even if you're tempted to be cynical, that in this great country, we are so fortunate to have men and women whose greatest motivation is to serve the public interest. Welcome, please, a member of the 9/11 Commission, former Congressman from the great state of Indiana, the Honorable Tim Roemer.
Thank you, George. With such a gracious introduction, I'm ready for questions. I can't give a speech better than that. George, thank you so much for the very kind words, the very eloquent words, and the very, very generous introduction. I hope I can live up to about 1/3 of it. Reverend Smith, it is an honor to be with you at such a prestigious place. When I let colleagues know that I was going to be coming here, United States senators, people who hold office and would give anything to be able to have this platform and be able to come here and have this good food and this great company, it is my privilege to be here and join with all of you here in San Diego this afternoon. I also want to recognize a friend who I went to school with at the University of California at San Diego, Eric Peterson, who's accompanied me here today. Eric will not be available for any questions about my time at college in La Jolla. No fair going after him, but it's so great for me to be back right near the campus where I learned so much, grew so much, served with such a diverse student body. When I come from South Bend, Indiana, in the Midwest, coming to San Diego with a great, smart student body, but also a student body that looks like America, that was one of the best experiences for me as an 18 and 19 and 20-year-old. People actually often question my sanity for many reasons. Some of the votes I might have cast, why I would want to be DNC chair, but they certainly questioned my sanity for going from La Jolla, California, back to Notre Dame, Indiana for graduate school and giving up this great weather you have. As I walked in today, I had a couple ladies in the back say something about my hair and comment on it, and I said, well, I got to tell you what happened to me from my days in undergraduate school. My 4-year-old Grace now looks at me, and she loves to draw pictures of her father. And so she'll get her crayons out, and she carefully looks at me and looks up and down and looks at my hair, and she gets the brown crayon out and colors my hair. And she puts that brown crayon away, and I say, "Okay, Grace, that looks good." And she reaches for that silver crayon and starts coloring and coloring. And I said, "Stop, Grace, you've done enough." And she says, "Oh, no, Daddy, I've got a lot more to go." So as I get older and older here, I'm sure you'll be commenting more and more on that. Finally, as I lead into my comments and I travel across the country, I'm blessed to be here in San Diego. I am going to big cities and small cities talking about this 9/11 Commission report, and often people recognize you. People watch these hearings all day long. The soap operas went off and the 9/11 Commission went on. And I was giving a speech in a small town in the Midwest a couple months ago. And the person that introduced me, much like George's very gracious introduction, also said to me, "You've got a big fan. He's about 80 years old. He's not feeling well today. And you'd make his day, since he watched you on TV for 6 months, if you'd say hi to him." So I got done with my 40-minute speech, and I went off the stage and bent down and said, "Sir, I sure hope you get better. I understand you're not feeling good." He looked up at me and he said, "Tim Roemer, I just heard that long-winded speech you gave, and I hope you get better." So I hope I don't put you to sleep. I hope I get a lot better. And certainly the 9/11 Commission, what we said, government needs to get better. Yes. We need to get a lot better. We need to get a lot better in a lot of ways. And people will ask me, "Why did you get involved in this effort? Why a guy from the Midwest pointed to such an important commission after these atrocious attacks?" I had one of the widows come in and speak with me as we were working on the legislation that I worked on with Senator McCain and Senator Lieberman to write into law why we needed a commission to look back and correct the problems. And she was helping with this legislation. And she and a couple other people came into my office that had lost their husbands on September the 11th, and they sat down and they said, "Tim Roemer, we want you on this commission. We need somebody that's going to get on this commission and ask tough questions. And they can't be afraid to ask those questions. You've got to be there ready to knock doors down and get the truth, whether it's the White House door, the CIA door, or the FBI door." And I said, "I'm ready." She said, "Here's why it's so important." And she reached down and she took her ring off her finger and she handed it across the small coffee table in my office. And tears started coming down her cheeks. And she said, "They found this ring that you now hold at Ground Zero 6 weeks after the attacks with a small part of my husband's finger left in it. This is all I have left," she said. "You hold it, Tim, and you go get answers. I don't want this happening to more wives, husbands, brothers, sisters. We made mistakes. We have to fix them. Let's go do our jobs." And that's what this commission did. Now, George said it was nominated for a National Book Award, which it was. Most commission reports go on a library shelf, never to be seen again. This is 24 weeks running on the bestseller list. This is a report that was not sitting on the shelf of a United States senator or congresswoman. It actually was passed into law on December the 17th, 2004. 80% of our recommendations were passed by the Senate and the House. And finally, after much disagreement and dissent, the President of the United States acquiesced and said, "You're right, I will sign those recommendations into law." It had been a long fight. where he had fought the creation of the commission, access for documents to the commission, sitting down with all 10 commissioners on the commission, providing Dr. Rice to the commission, but finally acquiescing and helping to make the country a little bit safer. What an extraordinary journey from 10 people and 70 staffers, part of a government commission, to being a bestseller and ultimately getting those recommendations signed into law. What happened? Why were we successful? What was it that made this commission so extraordinarily successful, unlike the Roberts Commission after Pearl Harbor, or the Warren Commission after President Kennedy's assassination, or even the Hart-Rudman Commission that had announced that they thought Americans would be dead in the streets due to terrorist attacks if we didn't do something in 1999, even before the attacks of September the 11th. Why didn't people listen? Why was this commission successful at the end of the day? I would say a couple reasons. One, it's because of these extraordinary 9/11 families. Here, ladies and gentlemen, if you remember nothing from my talk today, and you only remember the good food you've had, these people losing the people they loved the most in their lives, in Shanksville, in New York, at the Pentagon, losing a child, losing a husband, losing a wife to such a horrific attack, I could have seen them retreating back and saying, I blame my government for the mistakes. I'm not going to engage again. I've had it with the political system. Instead, these people demanded accountability from the political system, marched into Washington, D.C., and said, we want answers. And even these people who didn't know what was bigger, the House with 435 members or the Senate with 100, they asked me, Tim, which one do we go to that's bigger? Which has more when we first started out? And 2 years later, they could march into the editorial board of the New York Times and 90% of the time get an editorial written in favor of intelligence reform and 9/11 reform. These people had courage. These people had commitment. They wanted their government to work, and they demanded that it work. A great lesson for these students from Patrick Henry High School that I think sometimes come to politics thinking, why would anybody want to get involved in that business? There's little nobility in it. There's little ability to help the poor and help the homeless. Why would one want to do that? These people help make it the kind of profession where we can be proud of a report that fundamentally changes how our government is organized. Two, in addition to the 9/11 families and their courage and commitment, the staff that we hired, about 70 people, we understood very quickly that it wouldn't be the 10 commissioners that would be responsible solely for whether we succeeded and failed. It would be the people we hired. And we went to hire good writers. Anybody, I don't know how many have read this report. Can I see a show of hands of those that have read it? Fair amount of people in here. Simple declarative sentence. Very easy to understand, yet very tough to put down once you start reading it. It'll break your heart. It'll make you mad about the mistakes that government keeps making over and over and over again. But it'll also, hopefully by the end, show you that you can find problems, but also find answers. It's one thing to be part of government and say, I don't like what's happening. This is wrong. But it's also the beauty of politics. Bobby Kennedy talked about this. is how do you solve that problem and bring people together in principled and pragmatic ways to help improve the education system, to help feed the hungry, to help your government so that it doesn't spend your money into deficits after deficits after deficits, to make our people and our government accountable. That was what we tried to do with this report, is connect it to you. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we knew we could be maybe successful on TV. The 9/11 families could be successful in terms of their compelling moral persuasion and message and the spirit that they brought. But if you, the reader, if you, the American citizen, if you, the person watching this on TV, clicked it off, we weren't going to succeed at the end of the day. We weren't going to be able to move our government, our Congress, our White House to make a difference. So the 9/11 family members, the staff people that helped us write this report and connect to you, really were fundamentally important in this effort. People ask me as I travel all over the country, they say, who are the most interesting people you met with on this commission? What was it like to sit down with President Bush and Vice President Cheney for 3 hours and 43 minutes in the Oval Office and ask them questions? What was it like to sit down with President Clinton for over 4 hours? And we might still be there if we hadn't had to go to another meeting. And him talking about his views of how to win the long-term war on terror. What was it like to sit down with Secretaries of State and Defense in both the Clinton and the Bush administrations and get their input on these issues? I think one of the most interesting questions that I had during the whole 23 or 24 months, and really what you should try to remember as we gauge our success in the war on terror in the future, is we can kill terrorists and go find them in Afghanistan and Iraq, but can you solely do that more effectively than the terrorists are creating more and more terrorists through Iraq, through mullahs that are teaching the hatred to young 7- and 8-year-olds to go out and kill Jews and kill Americans. We need folks not to just use our military power effectively, but our economic power effectively, our educational power effectively, our effectiveness in soft power, in diplomacy, and making friends in the world that can help us win this long-term war on radical Islamist terrorism. Those are some of the big issues that we face as we go forward. I really like the question and answer periods, so I want to try to wrap this up and get there. And I want to conclude on maybe one of the most compelling parts in this book. And those that have read it, I apologize for repeating it. Those that haven't, I hope you'll purchase the book. I don't get any royalties from George's markup from $5 to $10. Maybe the Catfish Club does. Maybe they should. I don't know. One of the things that's still hard for me to talk about as I look back and reflect on what happened on September the 11th, I was in the Capitol, up on Capitol Hill. I went to the Pentagon that night. It was still smoking, on fire. I saw what the terrorists had done to this fortress, this Pentagon building that looked like nobody could ever do any damage to this building. And in our report, what we heard about is one of the most remarkable stories in American history. Shortly before 10 o'clock on September the 11th, family members on Flight 93 started receiving phone calls from their loved ones about planes that had been hijacked and flown into the trade centers in New York. They knew their plane, flying somewhere over Pennsylvania, had just been hijacked. They knew they were in serious trouble. Some of them speculated by phone conversations with their loved ones that they thought they were headed for Chicago and maybe a building there. What they did in the ensuing minutes was absolutely extraordinary. They said goodbye to the people they loved the most in the world and said they had to take a vote, something we've done in our history for 230 years. And they voted to take that plane down and save people in Chicago or Washington or wherever that plane was headed. They voted, they attacked the cockpit. There are voice recordings that we have that show that there was a struggle for the plane. There were 42 gyrations of the plane going back and forth and the pilot screaming, what to do, what to do. These people were armed with the knowledge that our country had been attacked and not armed with anything else but their courage. And they saved thousands of lives by bringing that plane down. They were the first patriots in this long war on radical Islamic terrorism. If we can see that kind of courage, if we can in ourselves hoist up that kind of commitment, if we can replicate in some ways that kind of heroism, we can make this government of ours work not only on national security, we can make it work on social security. We can make it work on job security. We can make it reflect our values as a people, not the direction that it seems to be going. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Mr. Collins and I will ask a series of questions that you've written out, and at some point we'll open it up to the floor. Congressman, after issuing the report, what reaction from the President or his staff dismayed you the most? What was most hopeful?
Well, I think what we found when we released the report in July of this past year, July 22nd of 2004, was we wanted to make an impact right away in getting the White House and the Congress's attention to passing the bill. It had been 3 years since 9/11. It had been countless remarks about us being attacked again. Sometimes we had had reports that it would be domestically. In our report, I think it's on page 116, we talk about Osama bin Laden instructing his people to get some kind of a nuclear device or a dirty weapon, and it was a religious obligation to try to kill Americans. We knew that Al-Qaeda wanted to strike us again, and that we had waited too long to try to protect the country. So what surprised, I think, me was that Congress and the White House didn't jump up and embrace this right away and say, let's go forward. 3 years is too long. Let's pass this into law right away. We had long hearings through August and September. We had an initial foray into trying to pass the legislation through the House, and the House rejected it and went out of session. And then finally we're called back into an emergency session where we finally passed these recommendations into law. So I think what surprised me, what dismayed me the most, was how slow people in government were to react to this, and still how much we have to do. Congress is still spending money on pork barrel projects rather than on protecting where the intelligence shows us Al-Qaeda wants to attack. Congress is still organized along 1950s and 60s committee assignments, not for the hot war that we face now. So they have a long way to go, and Congress and the White House need to work together in trying to protect this country from loose nukes. and chemical and biological weapons, which continue to be a great threat. And there are 5 or 6 recommendations we make in here that Congress needs to act on, and act on quickly.
Congressman, the report clearly identifies that there were 4 types of failures: those in imagination, those of policy, those of capability, and those of management. After 9/11, President Bush announced that al-Qaeda was responsible for the attack on the USS Cole. Before 9/11, neither President Bush or Clinton took any action. Bin Laden's inference may well have been that these attacks, at least at the level of the Cole, were risk-free. Bin Laden remains hunted, but uncaptured. While his sanctuary in Afghanistan may be threatened, his sanctuary appears to be beyond our reach. Does killing bin Laden change the fact that most of the Islamic world does not like the United States? Real world, do we have a plan that's going to change this?
Great question, Herman. Whose question was that? Somebody read that report. Good question. That was a very good question. I should have guessed coming from you. Listen, if you assess the administration's progress in an objective manner in the war on terror, let's look at the 3 most important benchmarks. 1, have we captured Osama bin Laden? No. 2, is this so-called axis of evil stronger in the last 4 years or weaker? Stronger. Actually, with access, many people think, to nuclear weapons. And 3, are we diminishing the threat of terrorism with Iraq, or are we increasing the threat? The CIA of this administration just came out with a report last week. And that report, issued by the National Intelligence Council, said that Iraq is both a magnet for more terrorists and a conveyor belt to spin these terrorists out from Iraq into other places in the world. So, folks, we got a long way to go. We got a lot of work to do. And Herman's question, I think, is a good one. How do we do this in the long term? It's not simply going to kill terrorists. Although it's tough for me to say it, but having served on the Intelligence Committee, having voted for the war in Afghanistan, we do need to go and get these people. But we also need to go make friends in the world. We can't make new enemies every day. We have to go out and build alliances. We have to use our public diplomacy. We have to create schools to compete with the madrasas. We have to use our economic power to give people hope, not despair. And I don't think we're being effective. Herman, if you read this book and look at chapters 12 and 13, we lay out the answers as to a global strategy as to how to win this war long term in those areas I've just outlined.